Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's start today's episode. Alexis Patterson. On April 4, 1995, in Milwaukee's Washington Heights neighborhood, Alexis Patterson was born to parents Ayanna Patterson and Kenya Campbell. From the beginning, her parents chose not to use her full birth name, instead affectionately calling her Lexi. Over time, the nickname stuck, and she even picked up another moniker, Pi, used by close family friends. While Alexis was still very young, her family dynamic shifted when her mother Ayanna separated from Kenya Campbell. Following the split, Lexi and Ayanna spent much of their time together, growing even closer and forming a strong, inseparable mother-daughter bond. Eventually, Ayanna met Laurent Bourgeois, a fellow Wisconsin resident, and the two married around the early 2000s. As Alexis grew older, her vibrant personality became more evident. She was outgoing and full of energy, always eager to chat with anyone who would listen. While she was friendly and open to meeting new people, she remained cautious enough to avoid unsafe situations. In short, Alexis was widely regarded as a delightful child, someone people of all ages genuinely enjoyed being around. Her warmth left a lasting impression, and a teacher from her early education program, Benedicta Graves, once told the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, "Everybody always wanted to sit next to her. She always had a beautiful smile for everyone." It was clear to those around her that Alexis was a source of joy and light in the close-knit Washington Heights community. In late 2001, her family grew with the birth of a baby sister, welcomed by her mother Ayanna and stepfather Laurent. Unfortunately, not long after, the positive momentum in Alexis's life began to take a turn. Although she had never been particularly close to her biological father, Kenya Campbell, his legal troubles began to affect her indirectly. His involvement in a misdemeanor battery case cast a dark cloud over her life. In January 2002, Kenya was arrested and charged with both the misdemeanor battery and a bail-jumping offense. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. A few months later, he was taken into custody again, this time for repeatedly driving with a revoked license. Another few months later, on May 1, 2001, Kenya was further charged with a civil suit filed by the city of Milwaukee asking Kenya to pay back a $7,500 damages fee for a crashed vehicle separate from Kenya's personal car. It is unconfirmed by multiple sources if Kenya posted a $100 bail to leave jail after the arrest for the negligent operation charge, or was held in prison until his release on May 6, 2002, as is according to law enforcement. This timing is absolutely critical information, however, because in the most tragic twist of them all, Alexis Patterson was kidnapped from her elementary school's property on the morning of Tuesday, May 3, 2002. Let us now turn to the timeline of events leading up to Lexi's disappearance. In mid-April 2002, about 6 weeks before Alexis went missing, her elementary school at the time called Highmount Boulevard School receives a series of letters written by someone warning the school of an unknown man who had tried to abduct a little boy in the near vicinity of the campus. Investigators attempt to track down this supposed man by keeping an eye on the Highmount Boulevard foot traffic. However, little is discovered by way of these letters. Just a week later, as February came to a close, one of the Highmount Boulevard teachers witnesses an unidentified woman speaking to Alexis behind the school building. The teacher does not interrupt. However, she does mention it to her boss as well as Alexis's mother, Ayanna. Either that same night or on the following day, Ayanna sits Alexis down to talk about the dangers of speaking with strangers. Alexis seems receptive to the lecture in real time but quickly disobeys her mother's orders. 2 days after the teacher initially sees Alexis with the unidentified woman, she finds Alexis once again chatting with the same person behind the school. Again, the teacher speaks privately with Ayanna, who grows increasingly worried about her daughter's bizarre behavior. Fast forward 7 days later, on Monday, May 2, 2002, Alexis runs an errand with her mother and the pair go to the store. Ayanna lets Alexis pick out a treat to share with her classroom the following day, and Lexi specifically chooses cupcakes for her friends. The next day arrives on Tuesday, May 3rd, 2002, and Alexis wakes up like usual. She prepares for classes and goes into the kitchen for breakfast. Not too long afterwards, Ayanna Patterson enters the room. She asks her daughter about her homework and discovers Alexis had never completed the previous night's assignments even though Ayanna had asked her to do so. As punishment, Alexis is told she is no longer allowed to bring in the cupcakes for her classmates. Alexis shows frustration with her mother, but still goes to school, albeit begrudgingly. Around 8 a.m. that morning, Alexis leaves her home near the corner of West Garfield Avenue on North 49th Street with her then stepfather, Laurent Bourgeois. The Highmount Boulevard School, located at 4291 West Garfield Avenue, is only 1 block from Lexi's home, and she and Laurent arrive on campus in just a few minutes. Laurent then walks Alexis to the main crosswalk in front of the school and watches her cross it and march towards the school's playground where she would sometimes hang out before classes begin. Laurent takes one last look at his stepdaughter before turning around and walking back to his house. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Alexis Patterson. A couple of minutes later, a few different students at Highmount recall seeing Alexis sitting on the playground by herself, apparently upset and crying. However, this information is not shared until future interviews by police. As the day of May 3rd trudges forward, Alexis does not make an appearance at any of her classes at recess or at lunch. However, she is simply marked with an unexcused absence and teachers carry on with their lectures. At around 2:55 p.m., Alexis fails to return home from school and her mother, Ayanna, is immediately suspicious. It is only 242 steps to make it from her front door to the front steps of Highmount Boulevard, and Alexis had no appointments after school. Ayanna is initially stricken by the news without any idea of why her daughter wouldn't have shown up to class. Not long afterwards, at precisely 3 p.m., Ayanna knows something is wrong and runs down the streets to the school building. A few minutes later, Ayanna is able to track down school administrators who tell her that according to Lexi's teacher, the 7-year-old never attended a single class that entire day. Ayanna questions why none of the teachers or other staff members informed her of her daughter's absence, mainly because Alexis had achieved perfect attendance with straight A marks across the board and her missing presence would not have gone unnoticed. When traces of Alexis can't be found on school grounds, Ayanna then ventures to her grandmother's house, also in close vicinity to Highmount Boulevard. She too hasn't heard from Alexis that day and leaves Ayanna with no other option but to contact law enforcement. Thus, a few minutes past 3 p.m., and Ayanna calls the local authorities to report Alexis Patterson missing. Within the hour, the Milwaukee Police Department arrive at the Patterson residence and conduct a formal search around the area, including the school grounds. At first, both investigators and Lexi's own parents believe the situation to be that of a runaway child. Ayanna and Laurent both feel there was a real possibility of this being the case, as Alexis had left the house frustrated regarding her incomplete homework and the cupcake ordeal. The initial search was designated as grid for grid, with the first focus being on all northwest neighborhoods in the greater Milwaukee area. The search then focused on West Vine Street, North 60th Street, North 16th Street, and vacant homes in the immediate vicinity of Highmount Boulevard. Without finding anything of value, the following day, on Wednesday, May 4, 2002, authorities set up a mobile command post right outside of the Patterson home on 49th Street. A couple of days later, Arthur Jones, the Milwaukee PD chief, reveals to reporters that they still believe Alexis is a runaway due to the argument she had on the morning of her disappearance. Over the following weeks, police searches expand to dive teams when the nearby lagoon is explored to all of its depths. Meanwhile, on land, law enforcement uses various boat craft, motorcycles, helicopters, and even horseback riders to comb through the streets and woodlands of the surrounding Wisconsin areas. At the same time, hundreds of citizen volunteers from Milwaukee and the communities beyond come together to aid search and rescue efforts, specifically at hidden alleyways and public parks. There comes a twist when on May 14, 2002, the Milwaukee Police Department gives another interview in which Lexi's case is changed from that of a runaway to an endangered child held under suspicious circumstances. Within the first month of the investigation, detectives sit down with the fellow classmates of Alexis who were aware of her normal routines and activities whilst at school. They also interview the kids in the hopes that one of them might remember something or even someone in particular on the morning of the vanishing. Multiple students tell police they noticed a red truck parked in the near vicinity of their school the week leading up to Tuesday, May 3rd. Then right after Alexis went missing, the truck disappeared and hasn't been seen since. Unfortunately, law enforcement isn't able to locate a truck of that color in the surrounding neighborhoods and towns, and the vehicle has never been identified. Both Yana and Layron are interrogated by the police. However, each parent maintains their innocence. Kenya Campbell, Lexi's birth father, had previously been in jail until May 6 according to the MPD and was thus never fully interrogated as a suspect or person of interest. Nothing of much credibility appears for a few months until February, when an anonymous tipster calls into a local television studio and informs them that the missing body of a young girl was thrown in the nearby Milwaukee River in the northeastern area around Estabrook Park. Within days, the MPD sends a team of divers to search through the upper Milwaukee River, but find nothing resembling human remains. Detectives then turn to sex offender registries and people out on recent probation and parole rulings, but again, find not a shred of evidence. In the February, after no new leads have been unearthed in the search for Alexis, Laurent Bourgeois is given an official polygraph test by the MPD in regards to the disappearance. Reports then come out that Laurent actually failed his polygraph, but the questions aren't released and polygraph tests are famously unreliable. Yana also comes forward and announces she is in the middle of finalizing a divorce from Layron, who has recently been described as abusive and threatening. Over the next few years and beyond, both Lexi's blood father and stepfather go in and out of prison for various crimes. One in particular in 2013 sees Kenya arrested for beating his new 8-month-old daughter. In all the years leading to the present day, authorities have interviewed nearly 100 subjects and poured over 12,000 documents of both evidence files and notes. However, they are still no closer to finding Alexis or explaining the circumstances surrounding her suspicious disappearance. When looking at the overall picture of Alexis Patterson's case, it might seem like a cut and dried disappearance with kidnapping the most likely explanation. However, when you peel back the layers of the case file and the investigation itself, there are signs that not everything is as it seems, with a major conflict of interest at play via the roles of the police and their connection to Lexi's stepfather, Laurent Bourgeois. The situation dates all the way back to October 28, 1994, when Laurent was involved with a wide-scale bank robbery gone wrong in the greater Milwaukee area. During the robbery, Laurent was assigned as the getaway driver stationed right outside of the bank on West Capitol Drive. Meanwhile, his partner, Booker T. Shipp, conducted the actual robbery. On Shipp's way out of the bank and into the streets, law enforcement had already responded to the bank alarm triggered after Shipp's interruptions. The responding officer, Patrolman Ronald Hedbenny of the Glendale Police Department in the suburbs of Glendale, Wisconsin, made contact with Shipp and engaged in a short-foot chase. As Shipp made his escape, he used his firearm and shot repeatedly at Officer Hedbenny. Despite wearing a protective vest, Hedbenny was struck multiple times in the neck by Shipp's bullets and died en route to the hospital. Shipp was able to evade arrest on foot and made it to the rendezvous point with Laurent, who drove them away to safety. However, the two men wouldn't avoid capture forever. A few months later, Shipp was arrested for yet another armed robbery attempt, and Laurent was brought in as well. Prosecutors ended up striking a deal with Laurent, who was granted immunity if he testified against the shooter himself, Booker Shipp. So while the man responsible for killing the police officer was put behind bars, his accomplice was not. Sure, Laurent worked with the authorities to help them arrest their number one target, but that doesn't mean the entirety of the Milwaukee Police Department and surrounding agencies didn't look at Laurent with disdain and disgust. Fast forward to the early days of the investigation into finding Alexis Patterson. Both Yana and Laurent are interviewed separately by the MPD and were given polygraph tests in addition to the formal interrogation. We all know polygraph tests aren't admissible in a court of law, but are heavily utilized by law enforcement when conducting criminal investigations or other high-profile cases such as missing and runaway children. The results of these two polygraph tests is where the real suspicions begin that something may be unsettled in the heart of the Milwaukee Police Department. At first, none of the polygraph test results are released either to the general public or to Ayanna and Lauren themselves. It was by no means illegal to withhold results. And sometimes detectives fear results can impede their investigations if persons of interest are given the information. This time, however, the results were handled very differently. After first withholding the data, Milwaukee police eventually leaked the test results to the local media station stating that Diana had passed her polygraph, but her husband, Lauren, actually failed. At the time, Lauren immediately denied the media's newfound reporting. Within the hour, the Milwaukee Police Department arrive at the Patterson residence and conduct a formal search around the area, including the school grounds. At first, both investigators and Lexi's own parents believed the situation to be that of a runaway child. Ayanna and Lauren both feel there was a real possibility of this being the case, as Alexis had left the house frustrated regarding her incomplete homework and the cupcake ordeal. The initial search was designated as grid for grid, with the first focus being on all northwest neighborhoods in the greater Milwaukee area. The search then focused on West Vine Street, North 60th Street, North 16th Street, and vacant homes in the immediate vicinity of Highmount Boulevard. Without finding anything of value, the following day on Wednesday, May 4, 2002, authorities set up a mobile command post right outside of the Patterson home on 49th Street. A couple of days later, Arthur Jones, the Milwaukee PD chief, reveals to reporters that they still believe Alexis is a runaway due to the argument she had on the morning of her disappearance. Over the following weeks, police searches expand to dive teams when the nearby lagoon is explored to all of its depths. Meanwhile, on land, law enforcement uses various boat craft, motorcycles, helicopters, and even horseback riders to comb through the streets and woodlands of the surrounding Wisconsin areas. At the same time, hundreds of citizen volunteers from Milwaukee and the communities beyond come together to aid search and rescue efforts, specifically at hidden alleyways and public parks. There comes a twist when on May 14, 2002, the Milwaukee Police Department gives another interview in which Lexi's case is changed from that of a runaway to an endangered child held under suspicious circumstances. Within the first month of the investigation, detectives sit down with the fellow classmates of Alexis who were aware of her normal routines and activities whilst at school. They also interview the kids in the hopes that one of them might remember something or even someone in particular on the morning of the vanishing. Multiple students tell police they noticed a red truck parked in the near vicinity of their school the week leading up to Tuesday, May 3rd. Then right after Alexis went missing, the truck disappeared and hasn't been seen since. Unfortunately, law enforcement isn't able to locate a truck of that color in the surrounding neighborhoods and towns, and the vehicle has never been identified. Both Ayanna and Lauren are interrogated by the police. However, each parent maintains their innocence. Kenya Campbell, Lexi's birth father, had previously been in jail until May 6 according to the MPD, and was thus never fully interrogated as a suspect or person of interest. Nothing of much credibility appears for a few months until February, when an anonymous tipster calls into a local television studio and informs them that the missing body of a young girl was thrown in the nearby Milwaukee River in the northeastern area around Estabrook Park. Within days, the MPD sends a team of divers to search through the upper Milwaukee River, but find nothing resembling human remains. Detectives then turn to sex offender registries and people out on recent probation and parole rulings, but again, find not a shred of evidence. In the February, after no new leads have been unearthed in the search for Alexis, Laurent Bourgeois is given an official polygraph test by the MPD in regards to the disappearance. Reports then come out that Laurent actually failed his polygraph, but the questions aren't released and polygraph tests are famously unreliable. Ayanna also comes forward and announces she is in the middle of finalizing a divorce from Lauren, who has recently been described as abusive and threatening. Over the next few years and beyond, both Lexi's blood father and stepfather go in and out of prison for various crimes. One in particular in 2013 sees Kenya arrested for beating his new 8-month-old daughter. In all the years leading to the present day, authorities have interviewed nearly 100 subjects and poured over 12,000 documents of both evidence files and notes. However, they are still no closer to finding Alexis or explaining the circumstances surrounding her suspicious disappearance. When looking at the overall picture of Alexis Patterson's case, it might seem like a cut and dry disappearance with kidnapping the most likely explanation. However, when you peel back the layers of the case file and the investigation itself, there are signs that not everything is as it seems, with a major conflict of interest at play via the roles of the police and their connection to Lexi's stepfather, Laurent Bourgeois. The situation dates all the way back to October 28, 1994, when Laurent was involved with a wide-scale bank robbery gone wrong in the greater Milwaukee area. During the robbery, Laurent was assigned as the getaway driver stationed right outside of the bank on West Capitol Drive. Meanwhile, his partner, Booker T. Shipp, conducted the actual robbery. On Shipp's way out of the bank and into the streets, law enforcement had already responded to the bank alarm triggered after Shipp's interruptions. The responding officer, Patrolman Ronald Hedbenny of the Glendale Police Department in the suburbs of Glendale, Wisconsin, made contact with Shipp and engaged in a short-foot chase. As Shipp made his escape, he used his firearm and shot repeatedly at Officer Hedbenny. Despite wearing a protective vest, Hedbenny was struck multiple times in the neck by Shipp's bullets and died en route to the hospital. Shipp was able to evade arrest on foot and made it to the rendezvous point with Laurent, who drove them away to safety. However, the two men wouldn't avoid capture forever. A few months later, Shipp was arrested for yet another armed robbery attempt, and Laurent was brought in as well. Prosecutors ended up striking a deal with Laurent, who was granted immunity if he testified against the shooter himself, Booker Shipp. So while the man responsible for killing the police officer was put behind bars, his accomplice was not. Sure, Laurent worked with the authorities to help them arrest their number one target, but that doesn't mean the entirety of the Milwaukee Police Department and surrounding agencies didn't look at Laurent with disdain and disgust. Fast forward to the early days of the investigation into finding Alexis Patterson. Both Yana and Laurent are interviewed separately by the MPD and were given polygraph tests in addition to the formal interrogation. We all know polygraph tests aren't admissible in a court of law, but are heavily utilized by law enforcement when conducting criminal investigations or other high-profile cases such as missing and runaway children. The results of these two polygraph tests is where the real suspicions begin that something may be unsettled in the heart of the Milwaukee Police Department. At first, none of the polygraph test results are released either to the general public or to Ayanna and Laurent themselves. It was by no means illegal to withhold results. And sometimes detectives fear results can impede their investigations if persons of interest are given the information. This time, however, the results were handled very differently. After first withholding the data, Milwaukee police eventually leaked the test results to the local media station, stating that Diana had passed her polygraph, but her husband, Laurent, actually failed. At the time, Laurent immediately denied the media's newfound reporting. Yet something about this call doesn't sit well with us. While odds are that it was nothing more than a prank done in bad taste, there's a part of any sensible person who wonders if the caller could have been a perpetrator playing games with law enforcement, teasing them with what could be only to lead them astray. Could it have been a ploy by the perpetrator to buy time and escape the greater Milwaukee area? Could the man on the other end be the man who snatched Alexis Patterson? You could dig even deeper and ask the question, could the man who called the news station be somehow related to the prisoner who entered the investigation 1 to 2 years later? The events in question occurred sometime in either February 2004 or February 2005. Reports remain unclear about the exact year, when an inmate at a Wisconsin correctional facility came forward with a tip. He claimed that Alexis Patterson's remains had been transported to the southern United States and buried near a major metropolitan area. Acting swiftly, detectives followed the lead to an abandoned house in the Baton Rouge area of Louisiana. Despite a thorough investigation of the property and its surrounding grounds, no evidence was found. The tip ultimately led to a dead end. This raised suspicion about whether the inmate was the same individual who had previously contacted a local news outlet with a similarly misleading claim. False leads like this are unfortunately common in cold cases, especially those involving missing persons. However, Alexis's case didn't receive the level of media coverage or public engagement seen in other cases, partly because it coincided with the high-profile disappearance of Elizabeth Smart in Salt Lake City in February of the same year. Given this disparity in attention, it's not far-fetched to think a repeat hoaxer might have become fixated on Alexis's case and deliberately misled investigators multiple times. Another significant aspect of the investigation that has received surprisingly little public scrutiny involves two suspicious individuals. One is an unidentified woman who was seen speaking with Alexis behind her school in the weeks before her disappearance. The other is a man who was reportedly attempting to abduct a child from the Highmount Boulevard campus earlier that same month, both potentially crucial leads that remain unresolved. We really don't have much new information regarding these persons of interest, but we pray they were tracked down and ruled out of the case by the MPD. If you know anything about the person speaking to Alexis behind the Highmount Boulevard school building in the February, or the person responsible for the alleged kidnapping 6 weeks before Alexis went missing, now would be the time to come forward. The last remaining person of interest in the case of Alexis Patterson is definitely the most fascinating, as some people, including Ayanna Patterson herself, believe they have found her missing daughter in the small, sleepy suburb of Bryan, Ohio. The situation arose in the summer of 2016 when a reporter knocked on the front door of Ayanna Patterson's home and showed her a picture of a woman named Lisa from Bryan, Ohio, a small town in the northwest region of the state. Lisa bore a striking resemblance to the age-progressed photographs of Ayanna's missing daughter, and both the reporter and Lisa's ex-husband, a man by the name of Joshua Miller, felt she could be Alexis Patterson under a new identity without ever knowing. Lisa did not have any concrete memories of her life before the age of 10 without a birth certificate or any sort of documentation to prove where she came from. Lisa and Josh met in February 2009 and had a child together within their first couple of years. Lisa already had a kid from a previous relationship, but the conjoined family started off promising. Unfortunately, the marriage ran its course rather quickly, and in 2013, the couple divorced after only 4 years. That wouldn't be the end of their story, however. When Joshua saw the age-progressed photos of Alexis at age 17, he saw a striking resemblance to his ex-wife and started his own amateur investigation. At the time, he and Lisa were engaged in a custody battle over their son, but that didn't stop Joshua from diving deeper. He remarked about the inconsistencies with Lisa's upbringing, as we previously mentioned, about how she had told him when they first met she was born on Valentine's Day in Central America before being abandoned by her birth father and brought to the United States, and then California by her birth mother and stepfather 12 years before sometime in the 2000s. Yet Joshua couldn't let go of the fact that Lisa had a birthmark similar to Alexis in the exact same spot on their bodies, as well as multiple other matching details. Eventually, the similarities were too great to comprehend without further analysis, and Joshua submitted his theory to his ex-wife herself. Lisa was surprised by the developments, but actually reacted with empathy for Ariana and the entire Patterson family and agreed to a DNA swab by law enforcement. In the meantime, Lisa attempted to research more of her own ancestry. She got as far as nailing down her birth location in Central America and ordered a new birth certificates from her country of origin. The date on this new document had her birth date in the year 1988. Legitimate birth certificate. It makes Lisa simply an uncanny doppelganger. It also makes sense when considering Lisa's children. Her firstborn was too old to have been birthed by Alexis, unless Alexis gave birth at an incredibly young age, very rarely seen in modern society. Regardless, Lisa, Josh, and Ayanna waited patiently for the DNA testing. Wisconsin Senator Lena Taylor, a staunch supporter of Ayanna Patterson who also felt Lisa looked too much like Alexis to ignore, arranged for a sheriff deputy in Bryan, Ohio to collect a swab of Lisa's DNA and then send it to the Milwaukee PD via FedEx. Once the sample arrived, the MPD then sent it to the state's crime lab in Wisconsin. Eventually, the results came back. When Lisa's sequencing was compared to Ayanna Patterson's sequencing, they found the two DNA samples were not a match. Ayanna could not believe the news. She said the bodily similarities between Lisa and Alexis, the aforementioned birthmarks, the same moles above their left eye near the nose, the same bumps on their pinky fingers, and the same scars under their right eyes were too much to let go of. Ayanna felt the DNA samples must have been tampered with either intentionally or accidentally and fought to have new tests taken. She hired a private investigator and went back to the Milwaukee PD to ask if they could bring Lisa in and have a more official DNA swab taken without all of the intermediaries involved. In an unsettling twist, the MPD said no and went as far to tell Ayanna that they would only test Lisa again if Ayanna agreed to a second polygraph test, as well as asking her to tell them what really happened on the morning of May 2nd, insinuating Ayanna wasn't telling the truth from the start. This interaction only further disturbed and upset Ayanna, as she was unable to understand why a second polygraph was necessary if the first one 15 years before came back with a passing grade. Angry, Ayanna took a chance with the FBI, but the FBI said the exact same thing. She would need to undergo more lie detecting exam before federal help with the DNA swabs could be approved. Ayanna again denied a second test, declaring she wouldn't undergo further examination unless the specific results of her first one were released to her. Both local and federal agencies denied this request. Ayanna has since stopped pursuing the Lisa angle as a part of her own search for her still missing daughter, but feels in her heart that the Bryan, Ohio woman is most likely Alexis Patterson. Nevertheless, the survey continues. While the case of Alexis is by no means a cut and dry investigation with clear suspects or obvious answers, we feel it is nearly a certainty that Alexis did not leave of her own accord, was kidnapped against her will, and taken somewhere far from where she'd be easily found. While she may have been sad or frustrated that her mom didn't let her bring cupcakes to school, that is not severe enough to trigger a child with no history of running away or patterns of bad behavior to leave by their own free will. We also believe that neither Ayanna nor her ex-husbands were involved in Lexi's disappearance. In fact, it appears that all three individuals were given an unfair share of public and legal criticism. Ayanna herself has been outspoken about how she feels her family wasn't treated the same as the family of Elizabeth Smart when her case was taking off on a global scale at the same time. She believes her childhood spent in the poor districts of Milwaukee with parents who are drug abusers and partners who are in trouble with the law directly led to the clashes she had with the Milwaukee police departments and those in charge of the investigation. And we can't help but agree either. After looking through the case, there is more information regarding the Patterson family history and the lives of Kenya Campbell and Laurent Bourgeois than the actual search for Alexis. We have no data on persons of interest outside her father and stepfather. We don't know who the MPD has ruled out or who they are looking at. We don't have suspects. We don't have clues. We don't even have more details regarding the red truck that seemed to play a big role in the early investigation. The public should have been given police sketches of the woman seen talking to Alexis just before she went missing and the man seen trying to kidnap a child around the same time. The teacher who saw the woman would be able to give a proper description, as well as the parents who wrote the letters detailing the aforementioned male kidnapper. For all we know, it could have been a husband and wife working together to abduct a child for themselves. The phenomenon is unfortunately not as rare as one might think, especially when it comes to white adults stealing children of color to circumvent fees and the process of legal adoption. Of course, you can say this is all routine police work, that this information couldn't be made public because it could interrupt the investigation, or even throw it completely off course. But at the same time, it's not like the MPD wasn't releasing other information at this time, specifically the polygraph test results regarding Laurent Bourgeois, which one could argue messed up the investigation and the trust formed between parents and law enforcement more than anything else could. In the end, we have no idea who could have taken Alexis due to the complete lack of proper information released by detectives, which suggests finding both the woman who was last seen talking to Alexis in February, as well as the person who was seen attempting to abduct a child from the Highmount Boulevard campus that same month, or at the very least, get us their descriptions and build sketches of their profiles. We believe the unidentified woman has a real shot to at least know of the fate of Alexis Patterson. if not be the one directly involved in her disappearance. In addition to the one man attempting a similar kidnapping in the same place just 6 weeks before it happened to Alexis. Without a doubt, the little girl from Washington Heights was kidnapped, and someone out there knows exactly what happened. It's time we stop focusing on the Patterson family and look at the Milwaukee community and beyond for suspects and clues. In the meantime, it's important that we honor Alexis Patterson's life and legacy in the way she truly deserves. She was far more than just the victim of a heartbreaking mystery. She was a shining example of the light that pure innocence and kindness can bring into the world. Alexis had a natural ability to connect with others, offering warmth and comfort even in the most difficult moments. Her smile, her spirit, and her openness left a lasting impression on those around her. And while her trusting nature may have played a role in the tragedy we now face, that trust and love for others should never be viewed as a fault. Instead, we should continue to see Alexis as someone who still holds the potential to come home and continue the impact so many, especially her mother, believed she was destined to make. She was a vibrant, energetic child who loved bright colors like pink and purple, and found joy in simple pleasures like roller skating. Alexis was full of life and promise, a child with so much more to share. Today, she remains a symbol of joy, compassion, and the profound beauty that exists in those who embrace the world with hope and faith in others. Moving on to the next case. Cheyenne clues. Researching this case proved to be especially frustrating, as many sources listed conflicting dates regarding when Cheyenne Clues was last seen and when she was officially reported missing. Key details were also noticeably absent, yet I felt compelled to cover this story because it seems highly solvable and has received far too little attention. Cheyenne Clues, a 22-year-old from Chicago, was known for her upbeat and outgoing personality. Her social media was filled with selfies and humorous memes. On January 13, 2016, she suffered a devastating loss when her mother, whom she was very close to, passed away after a prolonged struggle with liver failure. Not long after, Cheyenne also lost her beloved dog. As one might expect, this period was extremely difficult for her. On September 4, 2016, she posted on Facebook, "Unfortunately just lost another part of my family, my puppy Mika. For 11 years I was lucky to call you my best friend. Go find mom and keep her company up there. I love you." After her losses, Cheyenne fell into a deep depression, and her pain was evident in the things she shared on Facebook. She also began spending time with people who were a negative influence on her. One of those individuals was 31-year-old Gabe Case. At one point, both Cheyenne and Gabe were arrested. Cheyenne faced charges for obstructing identification and the unlawful transport of alcohol, while Gabe was charged with possession of a controlled substance. On the night of November 27th, Cheyenne left her home with a laptop and a small amount of clothing, heading to the residence of 38-year-old Brian Biddle. This is 4 photos that was posted by Brian on Cheyenne's Facebook that day. Moving on to the next case. Crystal and Timmich. Crystal and Timmich was born on September 21, 1987, and lived in the Hyde Park neighborhood of South Central Los Angeles. On June 30, 1994, 6-year-old Crystal was picking peaches from a neighbor's tree with her brothers sometime between 2 and 5 p.m. Eventually, her brothers went back inside their house, leaving Crystal outside alone. Just minutes later, they returned to call her in, but Crystal was nowhere to be found. The LAPD was contacted, but despite their efforts, they were unable to locate her. At the time of her disappearance, none of the neighbors reported seeing anything out of the ordinary. In February 2005, police searched the crawl space of a house across the street from Crystal's home and discovered bones, which were later identified as animal remains. Crystal's case still remains unsolved to this day. Her family still lives in the same house, hoping to find out what happened to their daughter. This is a picture of what she might possibly look like today. She was last seen wearing a pink t-shirt, floral printed shorts, and white sneakers with images of the cartoon character for Little Mermaid. Moving on to the next case. Dorothy Distelhurst. Dorothy Distelhurst was born on January 13, 1928, to parents Alfred Edgar Distelhurst and Ruby Hamilton. The couple also had another daughter named Martha Jane, while Alfred had a son from a previous marriage called Alfred Jr. Dorothy was an active member of the Belmont Methodist Church and enjoyed going to Sunday school. She was known as a popular and well-liked girl with many friends. The family lived on a modest income, with Alfred working at a publishing house. Because of this, they seemed like unlikely targets for ransom demands, but that's exactly what happened in September 1934. On September 19th, 6-year-old Dorothy was walking home from kindergarten. The distance was only 3 blocks between her school and home in East Nashville, and she usually made the trip alone without any issues. But that day was different. At home, her parents anxiously waited for their daughter to walk through the door, dressed in her blue and white plaid dress, holding her pink lunch pail and school books. However, she never arrived. Dorothy never made it back home. Quickly alarmed, her parents contacted the authorities. Local law enforcement launched a thorough search for the missing 6-year-old, checking the school and nearby parks for any clues. Neither friends nor teachers had seen her, and there was no sign of Dorothy anywhere. It was as if she had simply disappeared. The media rushed to spread the news of the sudden disappearance of this cherished little girl, but instead of helping, it worsened the situation. Alfred and Ruby were soon overwhelmed with ransom letters, all of which the police declared to be fake. Among these letters, one in particular sent a deep chill through the parents. It demanded the equivalent of about $100,000 in exchange for the safe return of Dorothy. If they didn't comply, the letter writer said they'd burn Dorothy's eyes with acid. At one point, a man who demanded $5,000 was arrested and charged with extortion. The man didn't have Dorothy. In fact, he never set foot in Nashville. Alfred worked tirelessly to try and establish communication with the ransomware, even flying to his native New York to do so, but his efforts proved fruitless. He'd been in the middle of one of these attempts when he received the worst news. On November 13th, just months following Dorothy's vanishing, her body was found by 2 hospital employees who were digging flower beds in a remote corner of the grounds of Davidson County Tuberculosis Hospital. They discovered the shallow grave and the unclothed body of a child beneath the dirt. Just 20 feet away, Dorothy's clothing, books, and lunchbox were found. Dental records confirmed that the remains were indeed those of the missing Dorothy. As her family mourned, the medical examiner began the investigation. Dorothy had suffered a crushed skull, and her face had been burned with acid, likely an attempt to hide her identity. It was concluded that a hammer was probably the murder weapon, as she had multiple head injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. A rag was found stuffed in her mouth. The examiner also noted that Dorothy's body may have been kept in a cardboard box for several weeks before burial. There was no evidence of sexual assault. One newspaper article from the time reported the discovery and ended with the claim that police believed the little girl was killed by someone she knew. However, no further details or clarification on this statement were ever revealed. Did authorities suspect a friend of the family or perhaps a babysitter? Did she have any older friends that were capable of delivering such blows? Once more, Dorothy's case is one with few answers but infinite questions. Following the discovery of her body, federal agents and state investigators joined local law enforcement in a desperate hunt to find the perpetrator. Several people were questioned, but no one was ever charged with the crime. Reportedly, a week after Dorothy's body was recovered, a teenage boy found an iron spike 25 feet from where she'd been lying. Strands of hair was stuck to it, and it was possibly the murder weapon, although this was never established. There are many theories in Dorothy's case. Some online sleuths believe that the little girl was already dead when the ransom wrote their letter. Others have suggested that maybe this was a case of mistaken identity. Perhaps Dorothy was thought to have been from a well-off family, someone who could easily pay a ransom. It's also been speculated that maybe the culprit was a teenager. Just 4 years after Dorothy's demise, a 12-year-old girl named Marianne Ellis was kidnapped and killed less than half a mile from the Distelhurst home. 3 local teenagers were arrested and convicted for the tragic crime. According to one blog post on the case, a local private investigator believed Dorothy had been accidentally struck by a car and the driver had panicked and tried to cover it up. Meanwhile, investigators believe the killer was likely someone local who knew the area well, considering the unusual choice of burial site. Beyond that, they have found no clear motives or significant leads. The identity of Dorothy's murderer remains unknown. Dorothy was buried at Woodlawn Cemetery on November 16, 1934. Sadly, tragedy continued to impact the family even after her death. Alfred Jr. was killed 9 years later during World War II at the age of 26. Eventually, Alfred and Ruby retired to Virginia, where Alfred passed away in the 1970s. After his death, Ruby moved back to Tennessee, where she lived out the rest of her life until her passing in 1985. Moving on to the next case. Liz Barraza. On the morning of January 25, 2019, Elizabeth, Liz Barraza was setting up for a garage sale outside her home on the 8600 block of Cedar Walk Drive in Tomball, Texas. She was organizing the event to raise some extra funds for an upcoming anniversary trip to Florida with her husband, Sergio. That morning, Liz was alone. Sergio had left for work just minutes earlier. Only 4 minutes after his departure, a dark-colored Nissan truck pulled up across the street from their home. The person inside exited the vehicle, walked up the driveway, and engaged Liz in a brief conversation before suddenly pulling a gun and shooting her 4 times. Startlingly, the entire encounter was captured on a neighbor's security camera. The footage appears to show the shooter as someone resembling a woman dressed in a robe, but investigators have yet to confirm the perpetrator's gender. It remains a possibility that the appearance was part of a deliberate disguise. After the shooting, the suspect quickly returned to the vehicle and sped away from the scene. The gunfire was heard by nearby residents, who promptly called the police. Emergency responders arrived swiftly and transported Liz to Memorial Hermann Hospital, but tragically, she succumbed to her injuries the following day, just 1 day before she and Sergio were supposed to leave for their long-awaited trip. Despite having footage of the murder, police have been unable to make sense of the case. By all accounts, Liz was an incredibly generous individual. She was a member of the Star Wars charity group, the 501st Legion, and she and her husband would visit sick children in the hospital while dressed in costumes as part of this. She was a huge Star Wars and Harry Potter fan. Family asked mourners to bring wands and lightsabers to her vigil. Police found no evidence of financial difficulties or infidelity between Liz and Sergio, making it difficult for them to determine a motive. Notably, the vehicle that was used by the culprit was seen at around 2 a.m., several hours before the killing, as well as just before Sergio left for work. The car is believed to be a 4-door Nissan Frontier pickup truck. Investigators believe the perpetrator was waiting for Sergio to leave before confronting Liz. During a press conference, Liz's father, Bob Newell, noted the horror he and his family were now facing thanks to the callous actions of another. He said, quote, "A coward drove up, approached my daughter and forever changed our lives. An unknown assailant shot and killed an unarmed and defenseless woman in a brutal act that demands justice." Sergio told investigators that they did not advertise their garage sale until the morning of when they put up their signs around the neighborhood. Nothing was stolen from the couple's home at the time of the killing. Police revealed that the perpetrator used a revolver which does not discard shell casings. Earlier this year, Fox News reported that a new detective from the Harris County Sheriff's Office had been assigned to Elizabeth Barraza's case, and that both the FBI and Texas Rangers are now involved in the investigation. Liz's mother, Rosemary, shared that they'd been told there is new evidence in the case, though the details of that evidence have not been made public. Despite this development, no additional updates have been released to the public since. Liz's stepfather, Bob Newell, remains convinced that her murder was a targeted killing, possibly a paid hit, though the motive behind such an act remains unclear. Her case continues to be unsolved. Anyone with information that could help the investigation is encouraged to contact Crime Stoppers at 713-222-8477. Moving on to the next case. Patricia Joyce Morris. Patricia Joyce Morris was born on January 10, 1966, to George, a retired Army chief, and Marjorie Morris. She had 3 siblings, a sister and 2 brothers. Known affectionately as Patsy, she was born in Birmingham but moved to Isleworth, southwest London, at the age of 13. On June 16, 1980, Patsy disappeared during a school lunch break. It is believed that the 14-year-old decided to walk home that day because she needed to change into dry clothes after being caught without a raincoat that morning. On her way home, Patsy vanished. 2 days later, a police dog discovered her body on Hounslow Heath. She was found face down in a thicket just a quarter mile from her house, with a ligature used to take her life. At that time, Levi Belfield was only 12 years old. After leaving Crane Junior School, Belfield transferred to Feltham Comprehensive, the very same school Patsy attended. Interestingly, Belfield had once been Patsy's childhood boyfriend. A year following Patsy's disappearance, Belfield was convicted for his first recorded offense, burglary. On the day Patsy went missing, he was absent from school and was familiar with the area where her body was found. Patsy's mother was deeply puzzled when she learned of the location where her daughter's body was discovered. She couldn't understand why Patsy would have gone through that area. "We can't comprehend what she was doing on the heath. She was always told to stay away and never defied our rules," she told the press. Now knowing that Belfield frequently hung out there, often skipping school, it certainly raises questions. But was Belfield inherently evil from the start? Could a boy that age really be capable of committing something like that? Following the conclusion of Millie's case, the possibility was explored. When Patsy's father, George Morris, heard about Belfield's connection to his daughter, he recalled a time all those years ago when a teenage boy had called his house and given him a death threat. He believes that was Belfield. He's a local man, which is why it could be him. And it's terrifying to think that someone of 12 or 13 could have done it, George said. Patsy Morris wasn't the only unsolved slaying that Belfield was considered for. In 1990, 51-year-old housewife Judith Gold was found a stone's throw from her Hampstead home, having been viciously struck in the head with an unknown item. Similar incidents took place across London from 1990 to February 2004. All of these cases could be linked to Belfield due to the nature of them. The weapons of choice were distinct, the same type of weapons he used on Marcia and Amelie. While they couldn't confirm without a shadow of a doubt that he was the person responsible, he could also not be ruled out in any of the many incidents except for one. On July 6, 1996, 45-year-old Lynn Russell and her young daughter Megan, the pair and Lynn's other daughter, 9-year-old Josie, were ambushed while walking home from a swimming gala. They were then tied up and struck repeatedly with a hammer. Lynn, Megan, and the family dog lost their lives that day. Miraculously, Josie survived. While she was able to make a full recovery, it is highly likely that she still lives with the mental scars of what happened that tragic day. Belfield allegedly confessed to the crime to his cellmate. Belfield denies ever making this confession. His ex-girlfriend, who helped get a conviction in Millie's trial, has always maintained that Belfield was with her that day. "My daughter was born in '96, and that was the day of my birthday. He, Belfield, never left my side all day and all night, so there's absolutely no way he could have gone from Twickenham, where I lived, or Windsor, where I kept my horses, to Kent. Do what they say he did and get back without me knowing he was there. I can hand to my heart, I hate to say it, but I can say hand to my heart, he didn't do it," she said. Michael Stone was convicted of the charges after a second trial following a successful appeal from his first conviction. Michael Stone had been behind bars since February 2001. He still maintains his innocence. There have been many other cases that Belfield was considered for, and some that he allegedly confessed to. But as of today, police have not been able to find any substantial evidence that ties Belfield to any of these cases. Maybe one day, the police will track down who is responsible for taking these lives, and maybe that man may just be Levi Belfield. Levi Belfield remains incarcerated at HMP Frankland in County Durham, and will never again experience life outside prison walls. On June 29, 2017, Gemma published a book titled My Sister Millie. In this heartfelt memoir, she shares what it was like living through that turbulent period, coping with the loss of her sister, facing the media frenzy, and dealing with her parents' suspicions. Gemma also opens up about her journey toward healing. A snippet from the book's summary reads, "It's the story of two stolen childhoods, Millie's and Gemma's, and the love that held the family together as they battled through immense darkness and injustice." Moving on to the next case. The Circleville Letters. In 1976, the residents of Circleville, Ohio, began receiving disturbing handwritten letters from an anonymous source. The letters contained personal details about the recipients, and the author claimed to be watching them. They were postmarked from nearby Columbus but had no return address. The most threatening letters were directed at Mary Gillespie, with the Circleville letter writer accusing her of having an affair with the local school's superintendent. One particularly menacing letter stated, "I know where you live. I've been observing your house. I know you have children. This is no joke." The letters continued to escalate, and within 8 days, Mary Gillespie received a similar threatening letter. She kept the letters to herself until her husband, Ron, also received one. The letter warned that if Ron did not stop his wife's affair, his life would be in danger. After 2 weeks, another letter arrived at the Gillespie home. The letter read, "Gillespie, you have had 2 weeks and done nothing. Admit the truth and inform the school board. If not, I will broadcast it on CBS, posters, signs, and billboards until the truth comes out." At this point, Mary and Ron only shared the letters with 3 people: Ron's sister, her husband Paul Freshour, and Paul's sister. Mary had some suspicions about who might be behind the letters. They decided to have Paul write letters to the suspect, claiming that they know who he or she was. Their plan seemed to work. The letters stopped for several weeks. However, that changed on August 19, 1977, when Ron received a phone call from the alleged writer. Mary never did find out what was said or who made the call, but it was assumed to be the phantom author. Ron lost his temper, grabbed his pistol, and left the house. At an intersection close to where they lived, Ron's vehicle struck a tree and killed Ron Gillespie. If the caller was indeed the letter writer, then he or she had clearly carried out on the threat to Ron's life. When police investigated the crash, they discovered that Ron's gun had been fired once. Detectives could find no reason or excuse for Ron to have fired at all, whether it was deliberate or not. The crash happened moments after Ron drove away, and no shot was reported. Sheriff Dwight Radcliffe questioned and eliminated at least one suspect in the case. He then ruled Ron's death an accident, claiming that he had lost control and crashed while driving drunk. However, several residents soon received letters stating that Sheriff Radcliffe had been involved in a cover-up. According to Paul, Sheriff Radcliffe initially agreed that the death was the result of foul play. However, he allegedly changed his mind when the suspect passed a polygraph test. Ron's blood alcohol level was measured at 0.16, twice the legal limit, but many of his friends and family were surprised by this, as they didn't think he was a heavy drinker. After Ron's death, the threatening letters continued to arrive. Eventually, Mary and the school's superintendent admitted to having an affair, but they claimed it had started after the letters began. Mary kept her job as a school bus driver. In February 1983, she was harassed along her bus route, with the letter writer reportedly placing threatening signs near the road. One day, Mary had had enough and decided to tear down one of the signs. However, when she approached it, she discovered a booby trap set to kill her. The trap had a box which contained a small pistol. If Mary had pulled the sign off in a certain way, the gun would have fired. Police examined the firearm. While the serial number was partially scratched off, it was traceable. The weapon had belonged to Mary's former brother-in-law, Paul Freshour, who had recently separated from Ron's sister. Paul, however, claimed the gun had been stolen, but never reported it stolen. On February 25, 1983, Sheriff Radcliffe asked Paul to meet with him and take a handwriting test. He asked Paul to try and copy the handwriting from the letters. The sheriff also searched Paul's garage. He turned all the evidence he gathered over to the courts. On October 24, 1983, Paul Freshour stood trial for the attempted murder of Mary Greer. Although he was never formally charged with writing the threatening letters, they played a crucial role in the case against him. A handwriting expert testified that Paul was the author of the letters. Mary also testified that she believed Paul was behind the letters, particularly after his wife had visited her with the same suspicion. Paul's boss testified that Paul was not at work on the day the booby trap was discovered. Although Paul had a solid alibi for most of the day, he chose not to take the stand in his own defense. Paul Freshour was sentenced to the maximum term for attempted murder, 7 to 25 years. While most assumed that the letters would stop once Paul was incarcerated, they continued. All of them were postmarked from Columbus, even though Paul was locked up in Lima, across the state. While there, he himself received letters from the writer. It read in part, "Now, when are you going to believe that you aren't going to get out of there? I told you 2 years ago, when we set them up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all?" In December 1990, Paul became eligible for parole. He was denied parole because of the letters, despite there being no possible way he could have been sending them. In May 1994, after serving 10 years, Paul Freshour was granted parole. He maintained his innocence until his death in 2012. 6 months after Freshour's release, Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment about the Circleville letters. Shortly after, the network received a postcard, seemingly from the writer. The message read, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. Do nothing to harm Sheriff Radcliffe. If you come to Ohio, you sickos will pay." It was signed by the Circleville writer. Though the letters eventually stopped, the identity of their author remains a mystery. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.